that you hang on to anything that makes you feel more secure emotionally, whether it's fundamentalist religion or a reductionist view of the universe, which is right over this gene here that makes you want to punch people in the head when they take the scientific process and subject it to their pathological literal-mindedness.
Is science still science if it's designed to prove a political point? A few weeks ago, I came across a doctoral dissertation published on ArXiv out of the Cyprus University of Technology by the now Dr. Savas Zanato. First of all, congratulations, Doctor. But I came across this paper because a certain deep web Ethiopian fertility idol trading bazaar, also known as 4chan, and particularly its politically incorrect board, was having a field day in response to this dissertation. Why? Well, because they were the subject matter, and the good doctor had some pretty scathing things to say in his dissertation about 4chan, Gab, and conservatives in general, with plenty of comments on Russian bots and trolls. Now, the lab out of which Dr. Zanato works also responded with some smarmy tweets to the attention the paper was receiving, but not to mine, wherein I said, after taking a quick look at the work, that I wouldn't be quite so easy to ignore as a bunch of anonymous posters from a Norwegian cheesecake factory. Now, when I said that, I didn't mean that I was going to be harder to ignore because I have a small social media following. I said that because I was going to do what I'm about to do here, which is to thoroughly and utterly tear this paper apart, academically, in Minecraft. So I can't believe I'm going to do what I'm about to do, and that any of this is actually happening right now, but today I'm going to explain, in response to a doctoral thesis, how the heck the hacker known as 4chan works, as well as the spread of dank memes, and how Russian trolls stole the 2016 US election. So fasten your seatbelts, friends, because this is about to be a real deep dive into a dissertation, a dive so deep that I myself nearly drowned in the depths of bias and incompetence. So let's start by looking at how conservatives influenced the 2016 election across the internet by sharing so-called fake news. But first, let me tell you about this video's sponsor, NordVPN. Nord is a virtual private network that allows you to keep your personal information safe and secure online. Nord protects all of your information with double encryption to protect you from the watchful eyes of the likes of Dr. Zanato, or more competent actors, like the government, or actual hackers trying to track your activity online. With Nord, you can hide your IP address and quickly connect to any of their over 5,200 servers from 62 countries and counting, including China. You can take Nord with you anywhere on your laptop, Apple, or Android device, which is particularly important when connecting to unsecured public Wi-Fi. Right now, Nord is running a super cool holiday special, so if you click on the link in my description box, you'll get a special discount of 80% off a 3-year plan with Nord. That's just $3.49 a month, and with 3 full months of protection included on that for free. But wait, if that wasn't kind of baller enough, there's more! Included in this deal, you'll also get NordPass absolutely free. NordPass is a password manager app that securely keeps track of all of your passwords, so forget going through the arduous process of answering security questions or scribbling down your passwords on a piece of paper, because NordPass does all of that for you, completely safe and hassle-free. Seriously, friends, the current promotion is an excellent deal, and I'm kind of kicking myself because I just bought a 3-year plan a few months ago, before this deal was up, and considering how many complex passwords I have, NordPass is incredibly useful. I'm sure you've all heard of Nord before somewhere on YouTube, not just on my channel, and despite a lot of you expressing very legitimate concerns regarding a data breach that occurred a while ago but came to light more recently, let me assure you that the data was encrypted and no one really got their information stolen. I know this is something that many of you were concerned about, as was I, as I would never want to promote a product or service that I myself don't personally use. But Nord is one service that I stand by adamantly. I've been using Nord for about 2 years now, and I have complete faith in the company and their commitment to improve their security and to maintain their position as the #1 VPN, as rated by external sites like VPN Mentor. Additionally, if you ever have any questions or concerns, Nord has 24-hour customer support ready to answer those questions. As we're about to see over the course of this long video, keeping your information private is incredibly important, particularly when it comes to social media, because even if you think no one's watching, trust me, they are. And they will use your data to write a crappy doctoral dissertation. So if you don't want to be labeled as a Russian troll, or if you do, I don't know, you do you, fam, keep watching this video and consider signing up for NordVPN and their current excellent holiday deal to protect yourself from the shame of being included in an embarrassing piece of research. So with that, let's get into how social media was supposedly used to spread fake news. We're going to skip through a bunch of the preliminary pages of this dissertation, which mostly include definitions of terms, a literature review, and rationales for the use of different types of network analysis techniques, and so on. Although I may come back to some of these early sections later on for clarification if necessary. And because there's quite a bit of amusing bits in the definition section that might be more important later, but I don't want to blow my load just yet. I will say, though, that in providing his examples and definitions, the author exclusively uses cases related negatively to more center or right-leaning political orientations. For example, he includes speculation about the circumstances of the death of Seth Rich as a conspiracy theory, but considers sharing information about alleged Russian interference in the 2016 US election as dissemination of governmental information, not conspiracy nor rumor. Interesting, right? He makes note of the National Rifle Association using ads to spread their message as fake news, but in the definitions regarding paid actors, he makes no mention of organizations like Share Blue or Correct the Record. Neither are mentioned in the entirety of this work, in fact. So keep that all in mind as we go forward, because while not damning of political bias in and of itself, it illustrates that the author seems quick to provide examples that negatively reflect upon the right or center, but has some selective amnesia regarding similar behavior from left-wing outlets or organizations. But leaving these definitions and the literature review aside for now, let's skip ahead as to where things actually start to get juicy, like that sweet, juicy shack meat, and that's in Chapter 4. Immediately, the author's opinions are, here as previous in the work, overtly evident, stating that the rationale for this part of the study is to understand the spread of fake news and conspiracy theories, such as, in their words, the debunked Pizzagate conspiracy. Now, regardless of your opinion on Pizzagate, to say there is no evidence of elites in positions of power engaging in human trafficking and grooming is about as debunked as Epstein having killed himself. Don't get me wrong, I never saw any strong evidence of a lava pit that led directly to the center of the Earth and the domains of Moloch underneath Comet, Pizza, and Ping Pong, but particularly in the wake of everything surrounding the Epstein case and his associates, to so flippantly dismiss the existence of child rings as thoroughly debunked and as fake news and as a conspiracy theory in your very rationale for this segment is reductive at best. This has nothing to do with politics. This has to do with powerful people committing heinous crimes of which we know definitively that they are guilty. Dr. Zanto also states that this fake news led to a at the pizza place, which is not technically inaccurate, but kind of an interesting way to say that a guy showed up, fired 3 shots into a wall, and thankfully no one was hurt, and then was sent to jail for 4 years. Just saying, the phrasing seems a bit intentionally vague, and I only bring it up because I think we will find that the author's personal beliefs increasingly encroach on his attempts at data analysis. And if you're willing to misrepresent the rationale behind the onus of your study, why not misrepresent everything else in it? Let's follow these threads and see the tangled web that they weave. In his attempt to understand the spread of fake news, rumors, and conspiracy theories across major social media platforms, including Twitter, Reddit, and 4chan, specifically its politically incorrect board, or poll, which I'll refer to it as going forward, Zanto traced where a URL was first shared, or at least shared with some frequency, and followed its spread through other platforms and whether or not that URL linked to real news, or fake news. But to do this, he needed to first delineate legitimate news sources from alternative media sources, as he calls them, or let's be real, what he's talking about here, fake news. Already, we're going to come across a major methodological error here, and get used to hearing that because that's all this video is.
Isn't that cute? But it's wrong!
The list of credible news sites were collated from Alexa's top 100 news sites, excluding user-generated sites like Reddit. The problem here is that even reputable news organizations have often spread fake news too, Dr. Zanato. Consider, for example, the number of major outlets that are now being sued for spreading false information about Nicholas Sandmann, the young man who was slandered as a bigot and accused of harassing a Native American war veteran who was actually harassing him. Or what about the outlets reporting on the case of Jussie Smollett without waiting for a single bit of relevant information about what turned out to be a hoax hate crime. While it is far from perfect, using an external source for determining the way news sites handle information would have aided in this delineation which he just gave up to Alexa. And in this case, I went to NewsGuard. For example, NewsGuard certifies some of Xanato's official outlets, including CNN, Huffington Post, and Fox News, as reputable sources, but they also note that these sites often do not separate fact from opinion in their reporting. Interestingly, this is the exact same red flag that NewsGuard raises concerning Breitbart, which was listed as an alternative fake news website. LifeSet was also listed as a fake news site and is flagged as rarely correcting errors, but the exact same red flag is noted of The Hill, which was considered a mainstream news organization. Now, let's not play dumb here. Some of the alternative sites shared in this analysis do often post unverified crap, such as RT or InfoWars, but the point is, so does CNN and Huffington Post, often with alarming frequency. So this delineation just isn't very accurate, and the sources for Xanato's rationale and how he identified these supposedly fake news sites is telling of his bias. He cites his sources as Wikipedia and a site called fakenewswatch.com, which is now defunct, but as of the time of his data collection and using the Wayback Machine, stated its own list was collated using other dubious sites like Snopes. Fake News Watch includes a large list of satire websites as well, some of which ended up included in this analysis, such as Clickhole, but that's like saying The Onion is fake news.
The Onion has always delivered the news faster, more accurately, and with more unrestrained brute force than any other media organization in human history.
No duh. But by lumping in satire websites like Clickhole in with biased, although arguably no more so than the likes of CNN, yet legitimate news sites like Breitbart or LifeSet, this all seems incredibly suspect and likely produces inaccurate results. While Xanato defines these sites he finds to be fake news as alternative, in getting his list from sites like Fake News Watch, he curiously excludes many popular yet also generally credible alternative news sites in his analysis, such as the Daily Caller and the Daily Wire. Additionally, during the period of data collection, Breitbart was actually listed in the top 50 major news sources according to Alexa rankings, yet was considered an alternative, not mainstream, news organization. Interestingly as well, while RT and Sputnik were considered alternative or fake news due to their funding by the Russian government, for some reason, Al Jazeera, funded by the Qatari government and listed in Alexa's top 100 news sites, is seemingly absent from the mainstream source list. To me, all of this seems so arbitrary that the meaning behind any findings that he's going to pull from this dataset is going to be minimal, and instead, I think just illustrates an attempt to create a narrative, not find answers. When it came to his actual findings, a lot of the issues seemingly arise from lumping all of these sites so haphazardly together. Across Twitter, Reddit, and Poll, Breitbart, RT, and InfoWars were by far the most shared alternative sites, dwarfing the likes of satire pages such as Clickhole, or clickbait sites like World Daily News Report, the tagline of which is literally, "Where facts don't matter." When you shove all of these sites together into the same category as alternative news, is that it seems that these sites are only sharing Breitbart, RT, and InfoWars en masse because you are comparing them to irrelevant clickbait and satire pages that nobody cares about legitimately or consider legitimate. In contrast, across all website communities assessed, for mainstream news, CNN, the New York Times, the BBC, hey, by the way, another state-sponsored news source there, Dr. Xanato, and The Guardian were the most popular websites, and guilty of much of the same bias as Breitbart or RT. However, even with this skewing of data, he still couldn't find that these fringe web communities were only sharing so-called fake news. Instead, he found a wide variance in the types of links people shared both on Reddit and Twitter, with some users rarely or never posting links to these alternative news sites, and some posting them almost exclusively. To explain why more Twitter users tended to post more links to these, quote, fake news outlets than Reddit or other website users did, Xanato states this is likely because there is a large number of bots on Twitter. And I mean, hey, that's undeniably true. Twitter is riddled with bots, as Pew Data has illustrated. But here's the thing, Dr. Xanato. The very data you cite regarding the ubiquity of Twitter bots specifically indicates that said bots, during your period of data collection, posted about 44% of the time to conservative outlets and 41% of the time to liberal outlets, a difference which was statistically non-significant. To imply that all posting to conservative outlets, including the defunct realstrategy.com, which was shared almost exclusively on the cesspool known as Twitter, is due to bots which exclusively share right-leaning fake news is patently false, via the very Pew data that you are getting your information from, Doctor. Moreover, I want to point out that just a paragraph after the good doctor here came to the conclusion that the large number of alternative links being shared on Twitter was due to bots, he admits in a seeming moment of clarity, which is very rare in this dissertation, that the posting behavior from bots can affect real users' posting behavior. Hence, this activity is part of the overall news dissemination ecosystem and needs to be accounted for, and the satisfactory performance of such approaches is yet to be proven. And for these two reasons, he can only assume that the posts come from bots and not from real users, but he has no evidence in support of that, and yet still just concludes that all the Twitter users are bots. Why, Dr. Xanato, that doesn't sound particularly scientific to me, but you know what? I'm sure you're right. It's not like we just recently saw Twitter suspending accounts for spreading the meme, "I hired Donald Trump to fire people like Ivanovich," for supposedly being bots after a BuzzFeed journalist claimed that everyone spreading it was or anything, only to find that the phrase had originally been shared by right-wing figureheads with massive followings, starting with Jack Posobiec and soon after Donald Trump Jr., leading to the phrase becoming virulent. Now, although Jack did change his Twitter profile to reflect his status as a machine in mockery of this specific event, and perhaps to the surprise of many, Jack Posobiec and Donald Trump Jr. are in fact not robots.
Put your finger in my butthole. I like the way it feels.
This is the problem of just assuming the spread of information originates or is due to robots or trolls, particularly when you yourself admit that it's likely that natural posting behavior versus bot posting behavior is impossible to delineate, and therefore it's impossible to determine if this sharing is occurring organically or if it's occurring via the aid of bots, and more importantly, how potentially harmful this presupposition can be to free speech when it leads to suspensions of Twitter accounts, or even just when it leads to the silencing of alternative opinions, such has been the case with dissent and disagreement regarding opinions over the recent Star Wars movies, which previous research indicated may have been in some small way affected by bots or trolls, but yet is reported by in the mainstream media as being entirely influenced by bots or trolls, when really they made up only a fraction of the percent in that particular data analysis. This is how the media will spin these stories, and it's exactly what I think Dr. Xanato wants. Although admittedly, that's just my supposition. When we get into the actual data, that said data actually does farther harm to his assumptions, as alternative news sites were shared more frequently on Poll and Reddit in general than they were on Twitter. And if Twitter's full of bots, why is that the case? However, the data also indicate a relatively even sharing of mainstream news sources across all platforms, and overall, sharing of fake news URLs was significantly less common across all the corners of the web than were mainstream URLs. Additionally, the mainstream URLs spread faster in all instances than did the alternative ones. In terms of who shares what, where, and when, interestingly, while links tended to be posted first on 4chan, the notorious super hacker actually tended to be the originator of very few links that were disseminated across other platforms, either to mainstream or alternative sites that then spread to Reddit or Twitter. The majority of fake news instead tended to originate on Reddit, then spread to Twitter, and then end up on Poll, respectively. But this was also the case for mainstream news links as well. The only time that these alternative or fake news sites were spread more significantly than mainstream news was when the fake news sites came from Twitter and then spread to Reddit and finally ended up on the internet's butthole, with 29% fake news versus only 18% mainstream news. In other words, astonishingly, the hacker known as 4chan, hiding behind 7 proxies, is actually really bad at spreading clickhole links compared to Twitter. Which does potentially mean something, given yes, we know Twitter is full of bots. But we also know Twitter has as many left-leaning political bots as it does right ones. So, what does all of this mean? Not really much. Besides, I guess don't believe everything you read on Twitter, but if you were already doing that, I'm sorry to have to break this news to you, but Twitter is garbage.
Thank you for these lobsters and for this dump. I didn't mean that the way it sounded. Thank you for this dump, my home.
The overall takeaway from this entire segment, though, is that fake news is actually quite rare, and it doesn't spread anywhere near to the degree that mainstream news does, nor does it receive the amount of interaction or attention even on Twitter that we would expect if Twitter is so full of bots that are only sharing right-wing news, which we know that they're not. mainstream URLs receive an average of over 60 more retweets and 14 more likes than a post of a fake news URL or alternative news URL. Almost like, even if Twitter is full of bots, which we know it is, no one cares about them, and the spread of trends is likely not due to bot activity exclusively, as Xanato flippantly has claimed, but probably originates more organically from people with large followings spreading information or URLs from their own accounts. But you know what? I'm getting a bit tired of talking about URLs and fake news spreading online, so instead let's move into something that's much more fun. Something that I think you'll all be a bit more interested in. And that, of course, is memes. Because in the next segment, Dr. Xanato shifts his attention to the spread of racist, nasty images, such as the Happy Merchant and Pepe the Frog, across the dark corners of the internet. So buckle up, Homestuck, because we're about to take a look at a cluster analysis of some dank memes. Let me start this segment by rolling back some of my previous criticisms that I levied against the researcher because, honestly, I really enjoyed this segment, and while the general language is still littered with offhand political takes, I can't say I completely disagree with all of them. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and disagree that the Happy Merchant is, let's say, playfully anti-Semitic.
Just allow it to go there. I'll get in trouble, you won't.
But because the cluster analysis in this section is actually really interesting, and as far as I can tell, very well done, I like this segment of the paper. Moreover, this gives us an ability to prove, with data, that everyone on the internet steals memes from 4chan. Now, not like that's a revolutionary finding if that does turn out to be the case, but hold your horses because we'll get to it. But as I always say, just because something seems like common sense, it always needs to be backed up with data. Basically, Dr. Xanato used a deep learning model to track the spread and sharing of meme images across a variety of platforms, again including Twitter, Reddit, Poll, and in this case Gab. Oh, and the place where humor goes to die. Know Your Meme. Their dataset indicated that the majority of memes on Know Your Meme had unknown origins, followed by YouTube and then 4chan. However, if Dr. Xanato is allowed to speculate that the majority of accounts posting fake news on Twitter are Russian right-leaning bots, then I'm allowed to speculate that the majority of memes of unknown origin are still probably coming from 4chan, precisely because, for those of you unfamiliar with the deep web hacker website, threads quickly cycle and are only occasionally archived. But it's easy for anyone to save an image and then repost it to KYM, Know Your Meme, while no record of the original thread remains. Across all websites, the majority, up to 69% of images posted, were not traditional memes or a variation on a meme. Comparatively, far more meme clusters tended to be posted on Poll than other outlets. What's a meme cluster, you ask? Well, luckily we have some examples to look at. Here in figure 4.19, we have the dubs/checkum guy, or here in figure 420, smoke 'em if you got 'em.
Hey, want that one, my boy.
We see the nut button cluster, which is in fact not a sweet and salty treat, but a bunch of pretty lame memes. Or here in figure 4.21, we see an example of Goofy's Time meme, all of which is fascinating. But basically, you get what a meme cluster is. It's a variation on a theme of a meme. The memes with the largest clusters across Poll, Are the Donald, and Gab were assessed, and Trump was by far the most popular meme to meme during the time of data collection. Happy Merchant came in second place across both Gab and 4chan, and variations of Pepe the Frog came in third on 4chan and both second and third on Reddit, while demotivational images came in third on Gab. Gab is full of boomers, apparently confirmed. In terms of the popularity of individual memes, and not the prevalence of these clusters, Pepe reigns supreme on Poll, making up 4 of the 5 most posted images on the board, as well as coming in third on both Reddit and Gab. On those sites, the 2 most popular memes were weirdly both I've never heard about, with Reddit's top meme at the time being something called Manning Face, which appears to be a picture of famous hand egg star Peyton Manning, and Gab's dankest meme being Jesus Land, which is really only adding support for Gab being full of boomers. Twitter, unsurprisingly, was most fond of a bunch of normie tier garbage like Roll Safe and Evil Kermit. In terms of memes related to individual people, again, Trump was the most memeable man across all platforms. Second place fell to Steve Bannon on the Donald, Mitt Romney on Gab, Barack Obama on Twitter, and, of course, Uncle Adolf on Poll. It's official, Trump has defeated Hitler. Also, it looks like PewDiePie only showed up on Gab's top 10 list of people to meme, though, so maybe I have to retract my statement about Gab being full of boomers. No, it's really full of 19-year-olds, excuse me.
PP large, by the way, PP large. Felix Knight.
Dude, did you hear that? Did you see my PP so... Bro.
We also got some cool visualizations of meme clusters here, and I have to say, credit where credit's due. The only meme cluster that Dr. Xanato considered racist was that of the Happy Merchant. So good on you for not doing my boy Pepe wrong like his own creator did, although he does later mention in this work that Pepe is considered a hate symbol by the oh-so-reliable Anti-Defamation League. The Merchant also had very little cross-meme overlap, interestingly, and I also have to give some props to our researcher friend here for appropriately labeling Spurdo-Sparde and Apoapostasia, although I just prefer to call him Helper.
Perkele, siihen koske saatana vie.
Dr. Xanato does say that the posting of these racist memes, which interestingly he only really ever uses the Happy Merchant as an example of in this section, is done on these websites in order to stir up animosity and hate. But Dr. Xanato, what is a racist meme? The answer may or may not surprise you, dear friends. Xanato, in determining this, deferred to whether or not a meme was tagged as racist or anti-Semitic on Know Your Meme. He also states that a racist meme, again as dictated by KYM, is intended to incite hatred. But again, we have to go back a step into the logic in that posting a spicy meme isn't necessarily posted with that intent to incite hate here. I don't know if he's aware of this, but a lot of comedians make racially charged jokes without intending to incite hate or create division. Moreover, it comes off to me as bad methods to base whether or not a meme is racist depending on how it's labeled on KYM. Despite being, I'm sure as we all know, an esteemed meme trading network. But again, let's give the researcher the benefit of the doubt and just double check by looking up the racist tag on KYM and see what pops up. Oh, well, okay. There's the That's Racist Kid, Grumpy Grandpa, Member Berries, Daniel Tosh. I mean, sure, let's be real, there's some racist memes here. We've got Moon Man, Didn't Do Nothing, My Girl Tay, Lost But Never Forgotten.
You're disassembling me, but why?
You're not supposed to think that sort of stuff.
But of all of the memes on here, a lot of them are funny because they're kind of taking the piss out of racism or are critical of it. MLK Didn't Die for This is a black Twitter meme, and it's on here. The 2017 Chicago kidnapping livestream is listed on here too, which may not have been necessarily relevant during the total time of this data collection, but that was a racially motivated hate crime against a white man. My point is that this isn't a very good metric if you're trying to prove something about racist right-wing memes. Even if they're spicy, many of these memes are beloved by people of any racial or ethnic background. I mean, are you implying that posting
Jesus Christ
is intended to incite hate? Because that's basically what you said here, man. And I find it very interesting that he does seemingly always default to the example of the Happy Merchant when referencing this racist meme category, because it's one of the few things on this list that is actually arguably racist, or in that case anti-Semitic. Although still, even if it is, I would argue it's an error to assume that the reason someone would post the Merchant is to incite hate and not to, you know, make a joke about stereotypes? Yeah, because no one's ever done that before, Dr. Xanato. It's not like that's Larry David's entire career or anything.
I got a sweet lawyer! She's gonna get everything!
Another problem is that I don't think our young researcher here even bothered to categorize memes using the certified function on KYM. This is a problem because, given that KYM is a user-generated site, not only can anyone tag any meme as racist, as we've seen in this case, leading to very odd choices, but also that this aspect of the website means that anyone can upload anything and claim it's a meme, and then that's that. The certified option ensures that the meme is at least, you know, an actual viral meme. What so deeply frustrates me about all of this is that it all boils down to basic flaws in logic and methodology, not really in the data analysis. Because the analysis itself is really neat and seemingly well done, and the paper itself is so well put together. Really, it's fantastic. It has hyperlinks to everything he mentions. I mean, hats off to you, sir. I would have no clue what the Jesus Land meme was if you hadn't linked the KYM article in the paper itself. Excellent work. But when I see so much attention to detail, then accompanied by such basic flaws in logic, it kind of gives me a headache. Dr. Zanato, you know how you could have easily figured out if a meme was racist or not in a way that was a bit more reliable and a bit more valid than using a tag on a user-generated site? It's really simple. Hang on, take out a notebook because I'm going to explain it to you. You go onto Mechanical Turk or SurveyMonkey and you pay a bunch of people 50 cents to take a little test about memes. First of all, I guarantee you'll get plenty of responses because people love that kind of crap. And secondly, it would allow you to run inter-rater reliabilities of whether or not people actually felt an image was offensive or racist, because ultimately, your conclusions about why people are sharing these images involves your personal opinion about their intent. You believe that they are being malicious and hateful when they post these things. But if you're trying to understand people's intents and feelings, then you actually have to ask people if they find the thing being posted as offensive or hateful. I'm almost speechless, as I have been at many points while reading this paper, that you never thought to do a basic test of inter-rater reliability and instead just went with know your meme racism tags? Are you kidding me? Honestly, I feel like this is more your lab's fault than yours, because how at no point did one of your advisors, somebody in charge of you, not stop you and say, hey man, why don't we actually test to see if these memes are racist or not, and then we can shove even more data into this dissertation and really make it a more robust piece of work. I'm sincerely and legitimately concerned if at no point during this process this was never discussed in any way, considering your lab then went on Twitter and was flippantly posting about 4chan responding to your dissertation negatively. These are bad methods, full stop. There are flaws in the logic, and what this means is that as cool as a subsequent analysis is, that subsequent analysis is ultimately meaningless when the basis is flawed. You were on the verge of greatness. You were this close. My critique of his methods aside, we do have some more graphs to look at. And you all know how I feel about graphs. Oh wait, apparently that's a racist meme too. Oh no, Dr. Zanato, just look at these graphs. I think your dissertation is a racist meme and I'm gonna tag it as such on KYM. Don't do that, guys, by the way. Anyway, unsurprisingly, the platform that posted the highest number of these supposedly racist memes was hang on to your seats, friends, because this will shock you, much as Mike Pence, who was also the third most popular memeable person on the same website, 4chan. Again, there's a major problem with how racist meme is defined, so how much credence we can give to any of this is suspect at best, but it's also not surprising. Gab tended to see lots of memes in general, and sometimes post so many racist memes that it even made Pol blush, but this only tended to happen in small bursts. Gab also saw the most political memes, in terms of how well these posts were received by the community at large, given both Gab and Reddit have functions that allow users to give feedback. While political posts were popular on both websites, memes that fell into the racist category were far less likely to receive the same positive responses than non-racist political memes on Gab, while Redditors tended to like all memes, regardless of whether or not they were potentially offensive, but were politically oriented about evenly. While there may be no official voting system on Pol, it would be interesting to see what posts get the most views, because unlike upvotes, views are the only thing that really matter.
It's for views. Ship post to get some more views. Bump your big thread so real posts don't get views.
Speaking of all that really matters, let's get into the question I'm sure many of you are dying to know the answer to. Does the rest of the internet really just steal memes from Pol? Well, in terms of sheer number of memes, yes. Pol tended to be the bleeding edge on the pure amount of memes to spread to other websites, besides Twitter. While most sites tend to spread memes among the site itself most heavily, memes that originated from Pol were most commonly posted on Reddit in general are the Donald and Gab. The only exception was Twitter, which tended to steal its greatest number of memes from Reddit instead, but considering how sensitive Twitter is about anything even vaguely controversial, who's really surprised? What's interesting, though, is that while poll memes are spread to other sites with great frequency, the influence that the board has on the spread of those memes across the internet was actually the smallest of all of the outlets assessed. And instead, it was the Donald that had the greatest capacity for spreading memes far and wide that were then replicated on subsequent outlets, usually killing them in the process. In other words, poll memes spread easily across the internet, to all sites except for Twitter, in a high frequency, but they tend to be less influential in subsequent dissemination than those that originated on, for example, R the Donald. Of course, considering R the Donald got nuked, none of this really matters anymore, but it's also about what I expected. That is, poll memes get posted everywhere, but memes that gain the most popularity tended to come from Reddit, memes that are a bit more milquetoast. When this meme trading was broken down specifically into racial or political memes, which again I've expressed my issues with in methodology, poll was responsible for slightly more racist memes being posted on Reddit in general, Gab, and Twitter, but not the Donald. The most heavily concentrated spread of racist memes between sites actually traveled between Gab and Reddit in toto. But in contrast, some of the largest ratios of racist to non-racist memes spread across any outlets occurred between Reddit and Twitter, spreading memes back onto Gab. That is, Gab disseminates a bunch of spicy memes into Reddit, but Reddit and Twitter disseminate a bunch of milquetoast memes back onto Gab. The absolute widest ratio between racist and non-racist memes in the favor of the safe memes was the Donald memes being posted onto Poll. But if you've ever used Poll and have seen how they tend to react to Reddit memes, well, let's just say that's a meme in and of itself. In terms of politics, the Donald was responsible for some of the most sharing of political memes, with Poll in a far second place, while Gab and Reddit in general tended to mostly spread non-political memes back to the Donald. Additionally, when Dr. Xanato looked at how influential the spread of these memes were onto the communities that received them, interestingly, overall, the most influential memes originating on Poll were not the racist ones. Instead, it was racist Reddit memes that actually tended to be the most influential on Poll, which again makes sense because otherwise you're going to be told to go back. Gab's influence was mostly related to non-political memes, while other outlets generally tended to share more political content back and forth, seemingly forever. I get that was a whole lot to take in, and ultimately a pointless analysis of how memes are spread across the internet, so what are the takeaways that we can get from all of that? First of all, the entire idea that any of these data are in some way reflective of the spread of hateful or racist content is fundamentally wrong given the methods used via Know Your Meme category tags, as I think I've shown. It is faulty because all kinds of memes that are in no way racist were included under that tag. Additionally, Dr. Xanato's contention that these memes were used to incite hate is also silly because, at best, it infers intent behind a poster's actions by sharing a meme. Even with this in mind, most of the memes being shared weren't racist, even by this flawed definition, and while it was true that Poll makes the most memes and spreads them with the most frequency across other websites, their memes tend to have little influence over other web communities. Reddit's memes tended to be the most prolific, and they also tended to be political, not racist. So when you consider all kinds of memes under that category as racist, there's still very little sharing of these memes to other websites. If sites like Poll or Reddit or Gab are really these dens of villainy, wherein people create memes for the sole purpose of being mean or sowing division or being hateful, well, they're not very good at it by your own research, Dr. Xanato. While I think these data are interesting, and probably not what a good doctor here expected to find, or was hoping to find, even after using warped categorizations of whether or not a meme is racist, those flaws in his methods ultimately make most of the takeaways that we could have gleaned from this section meaningless. When the methods are flawed, the data will be flawed. My main takeaway from reading all of this personally is that our friend here is a bit of a memerino himself, and I actually enjoyed this section of the dissertation, which only in turn makes me more frustrated when the data ultimately are useless. In order for something to be valid, in a statistical sense, it must first be reliable, and the Know Your Meme categories is simply not a reliable way of determining whether or not something is racist. This means there's a failure at step 1, Dr. Xanato, in which case all subsequent analysis is moot. But unlike moot, Dr. Xanato does not want to be the little girl. Or maybe he does. He instead wants to be the little scientist. And I actually want him to succeed. I want him to do better. I want to see him grow and produce decent work, and that's truly why this dissertation actually kind of hurts me to read. But onward we must go. So really quickly, let's take a look at his analysis of Gab and archive services. I'm going to cover these two segments really quickly, or at least as quickly as possible, because frankly, they're boring. They bored me, and if they bored me, someone who reads journal articles each and every single day for fun, and gets excited about coefficients of determination and this dissertation's plethora of nice cumulative distribution functions, then I don't think any amount of me memeing on it will make it an entertaining segment. So let me just blast through this and the relevant findings. Chapter 5.1 is really just a deep dive into what Gab is as a website, who uses it, and what they use it for. Like I said, nothing exactly riveting. Why did our researcher friend devote 10 pages to one single website? Well, because he claims it's predominantly used by conservatives and is a den of hate speech that needs to be further understood, and presumably exposed. Because this is the only part of the section that's really of any interest to me, that is the reasons why he's actually looking at Gab, and because this is also where his methodological error comes into play, we're going to just focus on that bit primarily. Which is easy because despite being one of his main rationales for this segment, that Gab is a den of hate, Dr. Zanato devotes only a single paragraph to hate speech on Gab. He found that 5.4% of all Gab posts include a hate word, which is 2.4 times higher than the rate of hate words compared to Twitter, but less than half of the rate of hate words that are used on poll. Considering how ban-happy Twitter is, and how irreverent poll is, that's not exactly shocking, but I have some questions and qualms. Now, in my opinion, there is no such thing as hate speech. There's mean speech, there's hateful speech, but words change meaning based on context, both temporally and culturally. Threats of violence obviously are not free speech, but hate speech? Well, that's still free speech. Still, that's just my opinion, and I'm not interested in opinions when it concerns questions of science. So how was hate speech measured, and what was considered hate speech in this study? Well, Dr. Zanato's list of words that were considered hate speech were collected using the website hatebase.org. So let's head over to Hatebase, and just looking at English, take a look at the kind of heinous, vile language that was used in this analysis of Gab. Okay. Well, I immediately see a few problems, do you? First of all, just looking at the first page, some of these, actually a lot of these, I've never even heard of, and others are extremely contextual or have multiple meanings. ABC is apparently offensive, as in the first 3 letters of the alphabet, or as in the news source? The Michael Jackson song? Always be closing? Apparently it can mean American-born Chinese, which in and of itself, how is that offensive? Ape is listed as an extremely offensive word, but what if I'm talking about the animal? Apple is highly offensive, as in...
apple.
Oh no, banana too? Highly offensive? Brownie as well. A lot of food is hateful apparently. Look, I'm not saying there aren't offensive words on this list, but do you see what I mean about how context matters? If I'm sharing my fruit salad recipe on Gab, then just going off of this list that's being used in this analysis, then I have used 2 hate words.
Fruit salad, yummy, yummy. Fruit salad.
Maybe the reason this list is so weird is because it is also, as with Know Your Meme, user-generated. And just to see how easy it was to add an entry into the list, I updated it to include the term fishwagon, linking to an Urban Dictionary entry that I made as a joke with my friends about a fictional sexually transmitted disease that we invented when I was 17. And voila! It's now a hate word. You dirty, dirty bunch of fishwagons, you. Now, of course, I would never ever encourage any of you, my dear friends, to go onto Hatebase and add your own offensive words or terminology, but I can't exactly stop you now, can I? Since the site is, after all, based entirely on user submissions and reports. Again, this is bad methods, abysmal methods, and again, there's a really easy way to get an actual list of words that people find hateful by putting up a little survey. Have people rate how offensive they think these words are, maybe just drawing from the list of words even on this website that are considered highly offensive or extremely offensive, and then you have a data set that you could use that would give you the capacity to test for inter-rater reliability and come up with a more valid list, rather than using this completely user-submitted garbage. You can do better, sir. You can do better so easily. And that's what makes me so irritated by these sloppy methods. It is irresponsible at best and outright biased, negligent, and harmful at worst, Dr. Zanato.
I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed.
Some of the other data here that shed some more light on what people post about on Gab could potentially inform the conclusion that Gab is more racist or hateful somehow, but they don't, actually. For example, let's look at the words used in Gab bios. I see a lot of MAGA and variations thereof, the word love, free, life, etc. Doesn't sound very hateful to me. I mean, there's also guy sex, but if that's offensive, it doesn't seem very inclusive of all sexual orientations now, does it, Dr. Zanato? Let's look at the hashtags then. Again, it's a lot of MAGA, Trump, and politics, but the only thing here I think could be seen as offensive is ban Islam. I don't see anything actually hateful. And the same thing goes for the top category topics. While there were news stories that may be sensitive, such as the thing that a certain person did that made them vilified on the strip in 2017, or a certain person whose name you should absolutely never forget who died in a bizarre gardening accident totally unrelated to the Clinton email scandal, again, I don't see anything hateful here. While it certainly seems that Gab is predominantly used by conservatives and right-leaning people, based on the most prominent users being Milo Yiannopoulos, Paul Joseph Watson, Mike Cernovich, and other right-leaning commentators.
Scorpions are cooler than lobsters, aren't they?
No.
Lobsters are just tasty, scorpions are dangerous.
Lobsters are psychic.
And that the links that they tended to post on the site most commonly also tended to be conservative in nature, including Breitbart, the Gateway Pundit, and InfoWars. That's all I think we can actually glean from this part of the analysis. The data do not support Dr. Zanato's closing remarks, which include the claim that Gab attracts alt-right supporters, conspiracy theorists, and trolls, nor that based on the ridiculous hate-based website that he used, which is completely compiled by user submissions, that Gab is full of hateful language, nor that its discussions are focused on white nationalism, although certainly they do concern Donald Trump. You are reaching here, mister, and your data and your methods just do not back up what you are trying to conclude. The second section of this chapter is concerned with the use of archive websites like archive.is and the Wayback Machine. This section is extraordinarily boring, and I have even less to say about it than the bit on Gab because the conclusion is pretty obvious. People on the internet archive things for any number of reasons. Either because they are likely to be deleted, they are controversial in nature, or because they don't want certain websites to receive traffic or ad revenue. But there are a couple of mildly interesting tidbits in the data that we can look at. The majority of archive links tend to be posted on Reddit, with nearly 10 times as many archive links posted to the front page of the internet compared to Poll, and 100 times as many as compared to Twitter. This is likely in large part due to Reddit bots that automatically archive links. R the Donald also automatically deletes unarchived posts to news sources, with over 40% of unarchived links to sites like Washington Post, BuzzFeed, and Huffington Post, among many others, being removed from the subreddit in exchange for archive links. On Poll, most archive pages were poll threads themselves, and then in second place, some news sources as well as Twitter posts. Gab similarly tended to archive the same kinds of links towards sites, but Twitter was a bit more varied, with far fewer links to news websites. The most archived pages on Reddit, at large, tended to be other Reddit posts. Pastebin, Twitter, Imgur, and a plethora of news outlets, such as the Washington Post and the New York Times. Additionally, some subreddits tend to archive more links than others, as I mentioned the Donald, as well as Kotaku in Action and enough Trump spam. As for how this archiving affects the ad revenue of these sites, based on the average cost per impression or CPM, Dr. Zanato calculates that Washington Post and CNN have both lost individually more than $5,000 in ad revenue per month due to Reddit archiving, to which I can honestly and unironically only say, good job.
We did it, Reddit!
Ugh, and That's about it for this segment. Sorry, I was kind of falling asleep reading a lot of that. It's so boring, but at least something good came from depriving ad revenue to dishonest smear merchants. Of course, our researcher friend here concludes that this is a terrible thing being done by the alt-right in stealing thousands of dollars from poor, innocent journalists. But hey, guess what, Dr. Zanato? That's just like your opinion, man. And opinions have no place in science. So since you're showing us yours, I'm gonna show you mine. And I'm a shower, not a grower. Anyway, let's just move on to something that's totally not an opinion piece. Russian bots. As we've already thoroughly discussed, botting is commonplace on Twitter in the current year as it was in 2017. But in 2017, Twitter suspended over 2,700 accounts for supposed connections to the Russian government. In the 6th chapter of this dissertation, Dr. Xanatos seeks to understand the behavior of these bots and what they posted about prior to their suspension. The dataset draws from this list of suspended accounts, except immediately I have a bit of a problem with your list. This list was drawn from a list of accounts that were suspected as being Russian bots by Congress, but Congress's own definition of the criteria they used to determine whether or not an account belonged to a Russian bot or state actor included if the account was created in Russia, used a Russian phone carrier, a Russian email address, if the user's name contained Cyrillic characters, if they tweeted in Cyrillic, or if they had logged from an IP address that was from Russia at any point in time. In other words, if you are Russian, if you write in a language that uses Cyrillic, or if you happen to log into Twitter from Russia using, let's say, a VPN, your account was at risk for suspension and therefore being included in this list of Russian trolls or bots. For this reason, unsurprisingly, plenty of legitimate accounts, including users from Bulgaria, frequently reported being suspended, as well as at least 20 Americans that stepped forward and said that their accounts were erroneously suspended. But those are just the accounts we know about. Now, I'm not saying all of these accounts are not trolls, but the method used to determine if an account was linked to Russia wasn't particularly robust nor accurate, now was it? So just keep all of that in mind as we go forward and look at these data, which assessed only 1,000 of the nearly 3,000 suspended accounts. How many of those accounts were not trolls? Well, I can't precisely say, but that's important because neither can Dr. Xanato, and he's going to just ignore the fact that the inaccuracy of this list was widely reported upon, and just assume in his data analysis that every single person in his dataset was proven irrefutably to be a Russian state-funded actor. First, let's look at the temporal posting behavior for these bots, and we can see that they tended to have a spike in tweets slightly earlier in the day, starting around 7 to 8 a.m. UTC or GMT, when the rest of Twitter was mostly quiet. Except they also show a large spike in posting around 3 to 5 p.m. GMT, that's in the afternoon. But that's also the time at which most of Twitter was the most active. One of the main reasons why there was less activity during the earlier spike, though, is probably because that's extremely early in the morning for the East Coast of the United States. So I would be more prone to believe that a lot of the people posting then were probably posting either from Europe or possibly also posting in the late night on the West Coast, which would equal out to around 12 to 2 a.m. in California. Either way, it's not very good evidence that these people were posting exclusively from Moscow, which is a UTC plus 3 time zone, in which the early spike would be around 10 to 11 in the morning, and therefore also around 6 to 9 p.m. at night, which is a bit late to be tweeting if tweeting is your job.
Russia, what are you doing?
Tweeting for the government.
It's 4 o'clock in the morning. Why on earth are you tweeting?
Because I've lost control of my life.
In terms of when these accounts were made, a significant amount of them were created well before the 2016 election, which they were supposedly attempting to influence. And while there was a large increase shortly before the election, a lot of them were also made in 2017, well after the fact. In truth, 71% of these accounts were created before 2016. What's most odd about the significant portion of accounts made as far back as 2009 is that if the purpose of these accounts was to encourage people to vote for Trump, the Russians are really playing some intense interdimensional mahjong to be planning that far ahead. When looking at the bot names, there's no mention of Trump or MAGA in the usernames themselves, although in their profiles, 5.9% of them did use the word MAGA, 7.8% contained the word Trump, and 8.1% included the word conservative. In contrast, 10.7% had the word news in the description, and 1.3% also included the word news in their username. We're still, however, talking about less than a tenth at best for all of these being related to Trump or politics. Interestingly, I often see reports of Russian bots tending to change their profile names frequently to avoid detection, but this dataset actually shows the opposite, in that only 9% of the suspended accounts change their screen name at any point in time, in comparison to 19% of the rest of users on Twitter. But it does seem that some of these accounts were concerned with news and politics, obviously from their names and their descriptions and bios, particularly conservative politics. But that still doesn't really indicate that these are Russian trolls, since after all, while he lost the popular vote, 62 million American people did vote for Donald Trump, and it was about a year into his presidency that this purge on Twitter occurred, and Twitter is a bit rife with political discussion. In terms of the supposed trolls' behavior, Dr. Zanato found some major differences between what languages they spoke and the number of clients from which they tended to access the website versus the average Twitter user that remained unsuspended. Specifically, he found that the trolls actually tended to speak only one language in their tweets, 64% monolanguage users compared to 54% of the general population on Twitter. Of the suspended accounts, 61% used English, 27% used Russian, and 3.5% sprachen sie Deutsch. Now, as I mentioned, there's a problem here, because by Congress's own criteria for what makes someone a Russian troll on Twitter, the use of Cyrillic was a red flag, despite the fact that over 50 languages use Cyrillic outside of Russian. Hence why Bulgarians reported being suspended for no apparent reason. The problem is that because Cyrillic languages such as Bulgarian, Belarusian, Ukrainian, and so on share a lot of cognates, the Twitter API, which is what was used to determine and detect languages in this study, isn't particularly stellar at identifying languages, particularly when it's in a short tweet. Pavilli and Lewis 2016 found that Twitter isn't perfect when it comes to delineating Ukrainian and Russian specifically, in that tweets in other languages were erroneously tagged as Russian 8% of the time. That's fairly small, but still a potential error which was not accounted for in this analysis, which may indicate that a minimum, an absolute minimum, of that 27% which posted in Russian in his analysis may actually be closer to 25%. As for the types of clients used to post on Twitter, Zanato found that of the suspended accounts, only 28% posted from multiple different clients, and that their preferred client was the web app, while the baseline of Twitter users tended to prefer the mobile version of the app. This does seem to be a pretty significant difference between the groups of users, as while 50% of suspended accounts use the web app predominantly, only 6% of other Twitter users tended to use the web app. I would say, though, it's not like only regular people use mobile apps.
She wanted to set up her own Instagram account, and she's trying to figure out why. This sounds really silly, but do you know Brad Pitt? She keeps, like, she's trying to get Brad. She doesn't understand why when she follows Brad Pitt, why Brad Pitt doesn't follow her back.
He also provides us with a map of where users were posting from, but given pretty much everyone has a VPN these days, and hey, if you don't, you could always consider signing up for NordVPN by clicking the link in my description, so you too can post to Twitter from Japan or India like a large number of the baseline users. I don't really find this information, therefore, particularly illuminating. It is worth noting a few things, though. For example, the majority of suspended accounts came from the South Central region of the United States. When we go back to my speculation that some of the differences in posting times could be people posting around midnight on the West Coast, this makes a lot of sense. There are also lots of posters in the US Northeast, as well as quite a few in Germany. There are as well several sizable nodes in Russia, but again, Congress identified these accounts by just having posted from Russia at any point, including posting via a VPN, because they can't take that shit apart. An argument against the VPN issue, though, is that only 1% of the suspended accounts ever changed the country from which they posted, compared to 16% of the general population, so maybe that does have some credence. It would seemingly mean that the trolls, all actually posting from Russia, or supposedly posting from Russia, were very consistent about the servers that they were connecting to. In terms of the time zones, most of these accounts posted from the US Eastern and Pacific time zones, while the Athens and US Pacific zones were the most common in the baseline of all of Twitter. Again, when we look at posting times, peak posting occurred around 3 to 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Of course, a lot of these accounts were posting from Russia, but the problem goes back to the basic issue of conflating all Russian users with Russian state-sponsored actors, when the criteria for being suspended was literally just having a Russian phone service, a Russian email, or posting from Russia. So no duh. But again, none of this is in any way proof that all of these accounts were Russian state-sponsored actors, and as we know, it's been proven that they were not. One interesting thing about time zones, however, is that about 7% of the suspended accounts changed their time zone in Twitter settings 2 or 3 times, which was almost completely absent from the baseline of users, and that's actually pretty suspicious. But what really matters is what kind of tweets were these suspended accounts tweeting. The suspended accounts tended to post longer, more in-depth tweets with more characters than the baseline of users. They were more likely to post 1 or more images, and were less likely to post videos than the baseline. When we look at their mentions, they tended to include more mentions, and there are some other double eagle red flags here, considering that many, up to 0.8% of them, tagged the account Zubovnik, which does seem to have been an account linked to the Russian government, while 0.6% tagged real Donald Trump. The most commonly tagged account, however, appears to just be a Russian meme page, Leprosorium. Weirdly, Xanato doesn't mention that Zubovnik was permanently suspended from Twitter and seems to be one of the few confirmed connections to the Russian government in his discussion, but hey, if it's not obvious at this point in this very long video, I may be looking a bit more in-depth into this than he was at just a few points.
What does it mean? What does it mean?
The suspended accounts were more likely to post URLs in their tweets than baseline users, and many of these linked to news outlets compared to the baseline, which tended to link to more normie crap like World Star, which is where I may need to upload this video to if a certain Cypriot researcher thinks this video deconstruction is bullying and harassment. By the way, it's not. There are some weird things here too, though, including that 7% of the accounts linked to a now-defunct news site, reportsecret.com, which, by the way, Dr. Xanato, is exactly why archiving is useful and appears to exist now only as an extremely pro-Trump Facebook page, as well as Ryafian.ru, which seems to be a sketchy Russian news site. So, before I go forward, I want to make something very clear in this analysis. There seems to be some damning stuff here that's undeniable, and that a lot of these accounts really were Russian paid actors, trolls, bots, whatever you want to call them. But we know they were not in toto. Of course, foreign governments want to try and influence and affect US politics, just as the United States has a vested interest in influencing the politics of other nations. I don't think anyone would argue to the contrary, but what I'm doing here is illustrating how regular people could, and still do to this day, get their accounts on Twitter flagged because of the way that they use Twitter, if they tend to be more news or politics oriented, particularly if they tend to support or even talk about Donald Trump, because that's what these accounts were doing, and that's what they were flagged and ultimately suspended for. Compared to the baseline, who tended to use a lot of positive language, the troll accounts were slightly more neutral in their speech. In terms of what they were speaking about, top words included things like Trump, black, people, truth, and news. And while Trump was also on the minds of the baseline, they also tended to use more generic words like love and want and just. In other words, the suspended accounts were mostly talking about news and politics rather than more mundane topics.
Cheers!
And in terms of followers, the trolls were on average followed by 7,000 people and followed 3,000. But the baseline in this analysis had 25,000 followers and 6,000 people that they followed, which is kind of nutty and makes me a bit curious about who exactly the baseline was in this assessment, which is described as random by Dr. Xanato, but woo-wee! 25,000? That's a lot of average followers. I don't have anything like that many followers on Twitter. The suspended accounts did, however, tend to follow people and gain followers very quickly over their time on the website, gaining over 2,000 followers over the same time period as the baseline accounts accrued only 425. But considering the political and news-related orientation of most of these accounts, it makes sense that they would gain a lot of followers and follow more people over a shorter period of time, rather than people who just use Twitter as another social media outlet to talk about their day-to-day life or pretend to be outraged that their idol just the day before, J.K. Rowling, supported a woman who was fired for saying that chromosomes exist. Yeah, really excellent work there, woke Twitter.
Stop it, Rod, stop!
One thing that was unique to the suspended accounts is that they started deleting a large amount of their tweets beginning in October of 2016, just a month before the US presidential election, and continued to delete tweets at an increased rate until they were purged. Xanato contends this is to hide evidence of their illicit activity, which is of course possible, but it may also have been because Twitter started suspending people left and right, and it was also around the time that cancel culture started to go into overdrive, digging up old tweets to use as ammunition against people. While he then pulls out a case study of one particular account that changed from claiming to be a news source to being an African American for Trump account, and then deleted all of its tweets and rebranded as a Texas Patriot, as I said, of course, some of these accounts are bots. It's Twitter. We know that Twitter is full of bots. But we also know that not all of these purged accounts were trolls, and while plenty of the differences between their behavior could be explained by a portion of these handles actually being Russian actors, it also seems very possible that this purge was made so vague in its criteria as to remove a lot of accounts that were regular people who just happened to be talking about Trump news or politics. Despite everything I've been through with you in detail, Xanato's takeaways are that these accounts delete their tweets more and change their names more than the average user, when his own freaking data actually showed that wasn't the case in aggregate. The opposite was true. He even states that Russians use VPNs to post from their own country in addition to other locations. But again, if they're in Russia, the majority of their activity was in posting in the late afternoon to late evening in Russia, while it was during the midday on the East Coast and in Germany. You can't just actually show the data and then come to conclusions that the data don't fully corroborate. I don't know if your advisors actually read this dissertation, but I did, and I think your closing statement in this segment, as in all of the previous ones, just isn't backed up by your methods or by what the data actually indicate. Now there's one additional segment here that compares the activity of Russian trolls with Iranian trolls, except he admits immediately that he has no idea how Twitter, in this instance, identified who was an Iranian or Russian bot, and then draws the other half of his dataset in this part of the analysis from accounts that were flagged as potentially Russian state actors from freaking Reddit. Look, I'm tired, I'm sure you're tired. Going through this whole hot mess has probably taken a year off of my life. So do I need to explain already a bit of the flaw here in the methods? If you don't know how Twitter got the dataset and you're drawing the rest from Reddit, just saying, seems a little bit off. But don't just take my word for it, because let's look at the data and we can immediately see how absolutely all over the damn place it is. So let's get into the denouement. Who's trolling who? Let me say something for Reddit.
Best of luck, but don't come back. Bye!
It looks like they may have actually been better at finding legitimate fake accounts than Twitter was, because the accounts that they flagged were almost all made in May of 2015, while Twitter's Russian troll accounts were made at many points in time. For both the Russian and Iranian trolls flagged by Twitter, their number of followers and the people that they followed went up over time, but they had different patterns. In terms of when they gained followers and followed more people, Reddit's report on Russian trolls is completely inconsistent with Twitter's report on Russian trolls, which also showed different growth patterns from the Iranian trolls, except that they both grew prior to 2016, predominantly in 2014 to 2015. Reddit's Russian trolls and Twitter's Iranian trolls tended to post most frequently very early in the morning UTC, at which point it's midday in Russia and Iran, but Twitter's Russian trolls posted at all times of the day, including very late into the evening in Russia, near midnight. Reddit's Russian trolls were active at different times over the years than Twitter's Russian trolls, and Twitter's Russian trolls became less active, because Twitter suspended them over time. And as those flagged as trolls by Twitter became less active, the Iranian trolls became more active. In regards to sporadic activity on the accounts flagged as Russian trolls by Reddit, Dr. Xanato doesn't consider that the reduction in activity was because of those ongoing suspensions, which continued after that initial purge of 2,700 accounts. and instead says that it's because they were likely manipulating votes on other posts rather than posting themselves.
Explain me? You shut your fag up.
What the hell am I reading at this point? That's a lot of speculation there, and not taking basic facts into account. Most of Twitter's Russian trolls stopped posting in late 2015 and had been posting on the website for years beforehand. Other Russian trolls and Twitter samples stopped posting in 2017 as well, while there were plenty of supposed Russian accounts that just started posting in 2017 rather than earlier in time. In a really interesting turn of events, unlike the previous sample where the suspended accounts that were supposedly Russian trolls as found by Congress were shown to primarily use one language, largely English, in this segment, 80% of the Russians and 75% of the Iranians used 2 or more languages in their tweets, predominantly Russian and French respectively. Remember, in the previous set, more than 60% of the suspended account's tweets used English, but in this case, only 36% used English, compared to 53% which used Russian. This also changed over time, with Russians using more English in 2016 through 2017, and then moving back to more use of Russian. For Iranians, they mostly used French between 2014 and 2015, but afterward moved into a mix of French, English, and Arabic. Prior to 2013, Iranian accounts almost exclusively used English and Turkish. When we look at where these accounts are posting from, again we can see a lot of posting from Russia, both for Russians and Iranians, but we also see tons of posting from Western Europe, predominantly France, at least for the Iranians, but mostly the UK for Russians. The map for the US Russian bots aligns somewhat with the map for the accounts suspended in 2017 by Congress, but it's not identical, and it shows posting from both Russians and Iranians closer to Florida than the central United States as it was in the original one. Something that does look pretty suspicious here is in the overlap of both posters coming out of Rio de Janeiro. But then again, who doesn't want that Brazilian booty? Maybe they actually were posting from there. Meanwhile, while the previous report showed a lot of posters from Germany, there were few to none on this map. We've already gone over how VPNs make all of this pretty meaningless. But if these were all state-funded, state-sponsored actors, why does one dataset not match the other in terms of the locale of their posting? The main, if not the only thing the Russian and Iranian trolls seem to have in common is that they tended to post about news and politics predominantly. But what they talked about couldn't be more different. While the Russian accounts posted things like Trump train and vote Trump, the Iranian accounts posted things like impeach Trump and stop Trump, almost like there are trolls on both sides, which Dr. Xanato really barely mentions here. It also seems, though, that they tended to be more likely than other users to use Twitter from the web app. But I primarily use the web app because I'm something of a boomer myself. So does that make me a troll? Well, obviously. Now listen, as before, I'm in no way contending that there aren't bots on Twitter. Of course there are, we've been over that time and time again. Nor am I contending that state-funded actors don't have an active interest in influencing political discourse on Twitter. But just how much influence do these accounts have? Because that's ultimately what really matters, particularly when we can't say for sure if any of these accounts are definitively state-funded actors or not. While surely some of them are trolls, a lot of them could be regular people. That is still a possibility. So we need to know, what influence do these accounts have? And the answer is very, very little. While in the discussion, Dr. Xanato claims that these influences are significant, I want you to take a good close look and see the relative influence that Russian and Iranian trolls had on other internet communities. The share of their content spread accounted for, on average, about 1% of influence in the destination outlet. In terms of the perpetuation of the URLs that these accounts posted, both Russian and Iranian were the most influential on Twitter itself. But it's important to note that the URLs shared from the supposed Russian trolls had almost no influence on poll. Russians had the greatest influence on the Donald, but this too was minor. It was under 3% compared to the influence of every other outlet on the Donald. Reddit at large was most influenced by the Iranian trolls in contrast. In other words, the influence of these supposed trolls on Twitter was generally pretty small, but the Iranian trolls, the ones who hate Trump, were actually better at influencing Reddit, which, as we've seen before, is in and of itself heavily influential in terms of sharing to other websites. Comparatively, Russian bots were pretty bad at influencing Reddit or any other website besides the Donald. But what I hope that Homer Simpson makeup gun blast to the face of information I just threw at you illustrates is that Twitter's definition of a Russian bot doesn't align with those identified by Reddit, and there seems to be more suspicious activity at specific times of the day and the use of multiple languages when Reddit's dataset was included than just Twitter's suspended accounts. what I think this all gives credence to is precisely what I was describing in the previous section, which is that when Congress defines being linked to the Russian government so broadly, they're likely to catch a lot of people in their net that just don't belong. Additionally, for the trolls that do exist, they're not doing a very good job of causing the influence they're intended to produce. What I find so funny is in his concluding remarks here, Xanato notes how worrying it is that Russian bots have the extremely small effect that they do on R the Donald, and to a far lesser degree Gab, calling them useful idiots, but shows no concern for the larger effect that the anti-Trump Iranian trolls had on Reddit at large. Also, despite the fact that this paper was published this year and he had plenty of time to update this information, he doesn't really make note of the fact that R the Donald doesn't quite exist anymore. Well, he admits, according to his own data, that it's extremely difficult to separate trolls from real users. Throughout the course of this entire paper, he continually refers to anyone suspected of being a troll or suspended for being a troll as a troll inherent. Ultimately, he describes the actions of these so-called troll accounts, which he admits that he can neither confirm nor deny, likely aware of how contradictory the behavior of these different accounts, both those released by Congress and those identified by Twitter and Reddit respectively, and despite the fact that his own data illustrate relatively minuscule effects these accounts have on other internet communities, he ends this chapter by referring to all of this activity as a form of digital warfare. So, with that conclusion, let's come to some of our own. What I think we can really take away from all of this is that I'm sure many of you know there are bad actors determined to influence the political landscape. And I'm not just talking about state-funded trolls, be they Russian or Iranian or whatever. I'm talking about people like Dr. Xanato. Over the course of this video, I have shown at almost every single step how one researcher has used bad methods, ignored some findings in favor of others, and seemingly intentionally misinterpreted his own data because he wanted to prove a political point. And to me, that's more offensive than any hateful meme posted on 4chan. People will read this, take its findings at face value, if they bother to read it at all and not just the conclusion section or the abstract, because let's be clear what we just did, friends, it's a lot to read. Excluding the table of contents and the bibliography, we covered 167 pages of research in this video. I read scientific research every single day, and even for me, this was a massive sloth. Not just because of the length, but because at multiple points I developed a raging headache from the sheer ineptitude of what I was reading. Just from the language he uses, labeling people as useful idiots and zealots, calling entire communities of people racist and hateful before providing evidence, I knew there was probably going to be a lot of bias and error in this dissertation. But when I began this project, I was absolutely unprepared for the extent of the bad science. I'm a firm believer in Hanlon's razor, and I was more than willing to excuse many of the mistakes I found at first, but as I went through this, less and less was I able to attribute to incompetence what was clearly more well explained by malice, or in this case, perhaps not malice, but just political motivation. As I've said earlier, but let me reiterate, the work here, from the perspective of a network analysis, is good, and moreover, at least to me, extremely interesting. One of the main reasons I started getting interested in social science, as an undergraduate at least, was because I wanted to understand 4chan and other anonymous or pseudonymous communities online, how they functioned psychologically. So, of course, I love whenever I can get my grubby little mitts on some new study that looks at the notorious Finnish frog farming forum. Yeah, I get excited. That's precisely why this made me, at the same time, so frustrated, more so than if it was just bad research on any other topic, which I'm sure many of you know I can't tolerate either. The worst part is, though, that I see a good researcher and good science here somewhere. It's just buried underneath political motivation and bias. Look, we all have biases, but as a researcher, the first thing we need to acknowledge is those biases and set them aside. I should be clear, being that this is a doctoral dissertation, it's often much more personal piece of work than a journal article, but as science, I would not recommend a single segment of this piece for journal publication. And that makes me feel, more than anything, sad. And I might have been a bit more lenient on this paper if Dr. Xanato hadn't previously published or presented at conference much of this work included in this dissertation, because it means that it's seen some critical review outside just that of his advisors, and that's not unusual, by the way. Dissertations usually take years to put together, and a lot of times that means publishing bits of the work before compiling the finished product. But this is just so overwhelmingly political in nature. That fact makes me feel even worse for the state of my field. A part of me feels bad too, to, let's be honest, kind of viciously rip apart someone's passion at work. And as always, I hold no ill will towards Dr. Xanato. If anything, I want to help him. Seriously, Savas, hit me up on Twitter. Bounce ideas off of me. I know you won't because I'm a stupid hacker 4chan Russian troll zealot, but it would probably really help improve your work to get out of the mind frame and that echo chamber, which is ultimately stifling it and preventing you from obtaining useful findings, because that's the real takeaway here. Due to the methodological errors at step 1, most of the data here is ultimately useless. And for that reason, this has been one of the most difficult, if not the most difficult video for me to ever script. Not only because of the moral concerns I had about doing this to someone's dissertation, but because when I look at it, I see brilliance being smothered by partisanship. But either way, what do you guys think? Do you think Dr. Xanato is a partisan? Do you think this research is interesting? Regardless of whether or not it is, does it actually have any value? Or was this all just one big virtue signal that's completely pointless? Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. I hope you guys all had a wonderful, albeit wacky 2019, and I can't wait to see you all in the new year and the new decade. As for an era of memes, I think there's one thing that we can all agree on as 2019 closes out, and as these data indicate. Pepe was truly the greatest meme of the last 10 years. As always, I want to give a huge, huge thank you to all of my supporters on Patreon, Subscribestar, and Streamlabs. Without you guys, none of this would be possible nor necessary. Thank you all so much, and I hope you have had a wonderful holiday season. And as always, Altana Volt.
Cause math can be sexy. Cause having sex is like quadratic expansion. If it can't be split, then it's time to stop. And having sex is like doing fractions. It's improper for the larger one to be on top. Yeah, having sex is like math homework. I do it best when I'm alone in my bed. And squaring numbers are just like women. If they're under 13, just do them in your head. And new math